All right, so good to see each and every one of you this morning. Let me ask you to do something real quick. We've been doing this for several weeks now, and we're trying to get an idea of how many people or who um, is attending our services. So even if you've been here more than once, if you're a guest today, whomever you might be, I'm going to ask you to fill one of these out for us. These are inside your bulletin, so would you take this out and fill it out? This is our way of knowing you were here today. And it also gives us a venue for us to say hi to you, okay? This is not like a permit to stalk you, okay? So, sometimes people are very leery about filling things out in a church or something. It's like, oh, they're going to stalk me. They're going to call me every day. No, we're not going to do that. It's just our way of knowing that you're here, and we're trying to get, just an idea of who's attending our service. 9:30 is pretty early to attend church in some places, so we have people in and out a lot, and again, just fill that out if you will. There's going to be a plate. Guys, if there's not a plate back there right now, would somebody please be so kind as to put a plate back there and let people drop those in after the service? So I'm going to pretty much expect that somebody's going to do that to help us out, okay? So put a plate back there. All right, if you haven't been with us the last few weeks, we've been doing a series of messages, and if you're a guest with us today, we normally do series messages because it helps us stay on track with things. It kind of gives a flow of some thought and some idea and a direction. So we're doing a series on working through the challenges of life. Boy, I tell you what, everybody can relate to that on some level. Everybody in this room today, you've got some challenges in your life. You're facing something. It's like, man, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. All those things. And so we've been breaking it down into semesters, okay? 2 semesters each message, semester 1, semester 2. And then when we finish this series, we're all going to graduate, okay? By the way, we had some graduations this week. Those ladies who graduated, congratulations to your graduation. So we're going to graduate from this message series too, probably next week. I'm going to kind of wrap this up and we're going to look at some things. What do you do? We're going to kind of touch on it today, but what do you do when you just like, man, I don't know what to do. I just feel like giving up. And sometimes we all get there. Well, today we're going to look at focusing forward or forward focus. And last week, I was trying to really move us in this direction. And I'm going to do the same thing today. And I want everybody in the room to think about how you're going to move forward. It's God, give me forward direction. Maybe you already know exactly where you're going in the future. Maybe you don't. And I'm not here to protect or to predict your future, but we're going to help you grab some things this morning that will at least get you thinking about forward focus. And this week I was reading, I read a lot. I try to keep up with things that are going on around us. And I ran across this article titled The 40 Most Beautiful Places in the World. Now, obviously, that's going to be each person's opinion, right? Yeah. What you think is beautiful may not be beautiful to someone else. But the 40 most beautiful places in the world, one of them was in South Korea. Let's see that real quick. Anapji Pond. Has anyone in here ever been to or seen Anapji Pond? Okay. How many of you think I'm making this up? Okay, anybody think I'm making it up? Okay, there really is a place. There really is a place in South Korea called Anapji Pond. And I got the picture here for you so you could see how beautiful that was. That's beautiful, isn't it? Isn't that cool? Yeah, it's neat. Okay, and then there's, I want to pick out something in the States as well. And, you guys who've heard me all the time, we've traveled a lot over the years. And, one place that we've been to more than once is Glacier National Park up north of Montana. One of the most beautiful places that you'll ever see or that we've been to. And a few years ago, we were riding motorcycles up there with some friends and stopped and took some pictures. So let's see that one. This is my wife, Becky, looking off all the way across the mountains there, okay, at the very northern peak of Glacier National Park. You didn't know I was going to show that. And so there it is, okay, Glacier National Park. That is awesome. Look at the snow this is in July, okay? So a beautiful place. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, no, you're not really there. She's standing in front of a picture, okay? but no, that's real, okay? So 2 of the 40 most beautiful places in the world, Glacier National Park and Anapji Pond in South Korea, just 2 of the Many, many places that are beautiful. Well, I brought this up this morning. These are sort of like promised land things. And every one of us today have our own promised land. In other words, there's this place that we feel like it's, man, if I could only get there in my life, that would be my promised land. If you've read the Old Testament, you go from Exodus all the way through the book of Deuteronomy, and you see the journey that God's people, the Israelites, the Jewish people, took from Egypt to what God had promised them, their promised land. God described it as a place that was going to be flowing with milk and honey. It was this place that, man, you're not going to have any more problems. Everything's going to be provided. It's going to be the epitome, the utopia of somewhere that you would want to be, okay? And so we've been dissecting some of that last few weeks, and also some things from Moses' life. Well, I want us all to keep in mind as we begin this message that God really does have promised lands for each of us. Your life is headed in a direction this morning, and hopefully you're taking forward motion toward what you believe is your promised land, okay? Which is this beautiful place just for you. And your place is not going to be the same as someone on this side of the room and vice versa. So it's your promised land. And so in order to get there to the place in which, that maybe you've planned for yourself or God has designed for you, there's this journey, okay? And we're all on this journey, and we're moving forward. And one thing that keeps us moving forward in our journey is to have forward focus. We stay focused on destinations or places or whatever it might be that, is in our promised land. Well, we all have these visions of these places. Maybe it's a destiny for you this morning. It's like, man, if I could just get to this place. Or maybe it's, with a certain group of people, that's your promised land. Maybe it's something you want to do with your life. If you're a guest with us this morning, a lot of our church is made up of students or younger career individuals that are just getting started in life. And so maybe your promised land is, this accomplishment in your life. I don't know. But I do know this, that we all, whether it's a goal or whatever it might be, every one of us today are on this journey. And we can't reach these, let's say, promised lands without traveling our journey. Now, even if you're just now trying to figure out the whole God thing this morning, the Christianity thing, and it's like this is all brand new, and some of the people who attend this service, they're processing Christianity, trying to understand it a little bit, learn more about it, whatever it might be. The truth of God's word is that God really does have a plan for each person's life, and part of the, get where God wants us to be is this journey we travel on. So let's begin this morning with the first semester, and that's forward focus. And we're going to go to Deuteronomy. That's a little hard to say. Deuteronomy 34, verse 7. And I wish we had time to break down the whole story of Moses, the journey across the desert. Hopefully you know something of that story. But really, Deuteronomy takes us to the end of the story. And Moses is getting older. He's about to die. And so let's read this. Moses was 120 years old when he died. Wow. Now, can you imagine being 120 years old? That's me neither. Don't want to be. But Moses was. And there's two things that God's word points out about him at this point, and that is that his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone, okay? This is the days before Alzheimer's kicked in. Moses was 120 years old. He can still see well. He still has his strength, his vigor, his energy. And so that's what Deuteronomy 34:7 points out about him. Now, I brought that up because as we go back a little bit, we began this whole series with Moses at the burning bush. And even at the burning bush, Moses was like 80 years old, okay? And so he was going to spend the next 60 years of his life on this journey from 80 to 60. Now, take a moment just to imagine that, if you will, that you're just beginning to fulfill your goals, your dreams, your visions, your accomplishments at the age of 80. You're just now getting started. Well, that's the way it was with Moses. 80 years old, and he's just getting started on the journey. But guys, think about this with me, if you will, this morning. It's sometimes it's near the end of things when you really begin to discover how successful they are. It's only near the end, when you're about to reach the goal, go into the end zone, cross the line, so to speak, that you really begin to understand that you've traveled this journey, and now you're just beginning to understand what it was all about, or the success of it. And that's where Moses is in Deuteronomy 34. He looks back now, and he sees all this journey that he's traveled, and it's like, man, now this is coming together. God is connecting the dots in my life, and this is starting to make sense now. But there's a whole lot more to it than that. Just like my life or your life, sometimes while we're traveling in the journey, we don't really know what's going on. We have these challenges, these problems, all this stuff that comes up. And it's like, how do I work through these things? Well, the focal point this morning is this. One of the greatest ways that me or you, either one, can stay, on the journey is to have this forward focus, is to know where we're going and what we're supposed to do and the plan that God has for our lives. Well, let me break that down just a little bit. You see, God's vision for my life or your life is really more than just a place. We often think that, everything in life is this place or this thing or even this destination. And I want you to think about this with me just for a second, because this forward focus we're talking about this morning is not really a place. It's really a purpose. And so many people live their entire lives and they accomplish things, they reach destinations, maybe they even accomplish goals, but they miss the real purpose for their being here. And I will tell you this, that is a really major question that many people are asking in our culture today, and that is, why am I here? What is my purpose for breathing air on planet Earth? And people are asking those deeper questions, which oftentimes lead to these spiritual questions that we try to address here at the church. You see, for every one of you this morning that you're a believer, let's say you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you're a Christ follower on some level, then God really has written your name in the book of life, and he has a plan for you. And he's trying to lead you and guide you through that plan. If you're here this morning and you're like processing this, and it's like, I'm not a Christ follower yet, I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to understand it and learn some things, then God's just simply waiting to write your name down. But he still has a plan for you in your life. Let's look at this just for a moment, because Deuteronomy points out two things about Moses. It says, one, that his eyes were not weak. Now, one thing that we get from that verse as we dissect it is this, is that Moses was constantly driven by the vision that God had given him 60 years earlier. And it wasn't necessarily a place, although it was this promised land, but it was also, God was really more honed in or tuned in on what was going on in Moses' life during the journey. And so, if you will, let me suggest this morning that we all think about that just for a moment. That it's not so much where you're going, what you graduate from, or what you accomplish, who hires you. Those things are very important, and you need to nail those things down. But I want you to think about it on a little bit deeper level this morning, and that is, what is going on in your life on the journey to get there, the journey of life. Because God is oftentimes more concerned about what you're becoming than where you're going. We tend to focus on, where am I going? What am I going to accomplish? How do I get? And God's like, those things are great, and I've got a plan for that. But deeper than that, I'm really concerned about what's going on in your life, what you're becoming in your life. And so it says Moses' eyes were not weak, and he had this forward focus that just kept him on track with what God had planned for him. The second thing is this. The second characteristic is pointed out clearly here, and it says that his strength had not gone. Now, guys, you know what we get from this, folks? Is that Moses had this no quit, stay with it, stick it out mentality. And if you know anything about this journey from Exodus to Deuteronomy, you go back and read that, and it's like, man, this guy had every reason in the world to quit, to give up, to walk out. And yet he had this vision. His eyes kept him on this forward focus and kept him concentrated on what God was doing in his life, but also this promised land. Hey folks, have you ever thought about this? Our cultures, whether it's Asian, American, European, whatever it is, it's all pretty global these days. But our cultures dial us in to this thirst for the next big thing. You ever think about that? The next big thing. And I often think when I'm reading the story of Moses on the Exodus, I often think Moses had every reason in the world to quit. And, why didn't he look at, or maybe even desire or pray for the next big thing? God, this isn't working out. And I'm going to pray for the next big thing. But our cultures dial us into this thirst for the next big thing. And it's kind of like if I'm not involved in something that's not going my way, or if I'm not, involved in something that's moving in the direction that I want it to, or as fast as I want it to, then I'm ready for the next big thing. Now keep in mind, for all of us this morning, it's not really necessarily where we're going, but what is going on during the journey. The journey is really kind of more important than the destiny. If we read Exodus through Deuteronomy, there are hundreds of times when we look at that and read it that Moses, it's like, man, why didn't this guy just give up? Quit, walk out on these people. I mean, if you know anything about the story, you know that they griped and they complained and they grumbled about everything that happened on the way. And so Moses, he had reasons to give up, but he never did. And even at the end, we read this a moment ago, he still has vision, he still has his strength, he still has his vigor, his energy, whatever you want to call it. Moses never gave up. Now let's take another look at the story here. We're looking at first semester, and we're talking about forward focus, okay? And so before we move on, let's all kind of grab that this morning, that, God really does have a plan for my life. I really want to get on board with that, because God can move us from good to better to best. And so I want that forward focus that keeps me on track. And then a second thing is this I want to address this morning, and that is, as we're on this journey, our lives are developing, who really resources our journeys, okay? Who is it that's resourcing our journeys? Because Moses had to nail that down as well. You see, in this forward focused vision that God wants us to capture, many times we have to ask ourselves, who is resourcing this? If we're not careful, sometimes my life or your life both can turn out to be this little series of projects, and we're not really moving in the direction of that vision that God has. Oftentimes I still get calls from people that are asking employee questions or job-related questions or some advice about something or another. Not that I'm an employee guru, but did do that for several years. And I got a call this week from a young guy who is a marketing manager in a company here in Cincinnati, and his superiors have been trying to get him to go over to Taiwan and China. They've been trying to expand their business and purchase some companies over there. And this guy is a little bit, I don't know, it's kind of like I said a moment ago. If things are not moving as fast as you want them to, or things are not going his way, he kind of wants to back out a lot. And so, I try to help reel him back in, keep him on target, whatever it might be. But he called me up and said that, things have begun to change the way he thought about his job. He was under the impression that every time he did something, he ought to be compensated for it. The company pays him this good salary, but if I do something extra, I have to be compensated for something extra. And I'm trying to tell him, listen, that's in your job description, and if your company wants you to do that, then you're already on board with it. And so he didn't want to go to Taiwan because he felt like it was a waste of time. And a year and a half later, now they're wanting him to go to China and help develop some of the people over there that are going to help do marketing. And so I talked to him for a little while, and I called his name out, and I said, listen, here's something to think about. I said, this could be a way that they're trying to help you expand your abilities. And this company is resourcing you not only for a salary, but also to learn what's going to help you in the future. And as I talked to him through that, he began to tell me, listen for a while, and he said, I had a totally different focus than I should have had. He said, a year and a half ago, I was focused on nothing but greed. Nothing more than what I could get out of the company. He said, and now I just wanted you to know that I'm focused more on what value I can bring to the company, and not so much what I get out of it. And he said, the difference is this, is that I want to invest more in what I'm doing so that I can glean more out of what will help me in the future. And the point is this, folks, is that he began to develop an understanding that not only was he there for the company, but the company was there for him as well, and they were resourcing the things that he was going to enjoy and benefit from in the future. When we talk about forward focus, sometimes I think we really do, especially for those of who want like this spiritual walk, we have to ask ourselves who really is resourcing this vision. Now let's go back to Moses and his journey just for a moment, okay? If you know anything else, if you know anything about the story, you know that there came a time when God was trying to teach the people that he was their resource. Now we have a cornucopia of people that attend this service. And so every Sunday we try to hit everybody in a way they can relate to it. But ultimately we point everybody to the truth of God's word. And God's word tells us that no good thing comes unless it comes from God, and that everything comes through the fingers or the hands of God. Every good thing does. And so we grab that truth. Well, when we go back to Exodus and we see these people, they go out into the desert. Moses is leading them to a place they've never been before. And Moses is taking a group of people so big and so vast that no one could, get their arms around that. And now they're out there with, when they left Egypt, here's one thing they didn't do. They didn't pack up a bunch of U-Haul chariots and fill them full of food, okay? If you read that story, when they left Egypt, they did pillage Egypt a little bit and took some treasures with them, but they couldn't eat gold and silver. They took no food with them. And so they get out there in the middle of the desert, and just like me or you, they start to get hungry. I mean, even like right now, I'm thinking about a cinnamon crunch bagel, and it's like, that would be pretty good right now. And so they get out there in the middle of the desert. There's no food, no provisions. And so God says, I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to resource this vision. I'm going to resource this journey. And they get out there, and God provides the quail, these little quail first to eat. And then after that, God provides them with this thing called manna, okay? It's like this bread type stuff. You can read it for yourself in the book of Exodus. And Moses nor the Israelites had taken anything with them, and I'm sure they asked the same questions that you and I might ask, and that is, how are we going to eat? Who's going to provide the food? Are we going to start? All the questions that we might ask. And here's what happened, guys. Folks, here's what happened. They got out there and they got hungry, and God provided manna for them. But he told them this: I want you to collect just enough manna for today. Do not take manna for tomorrow. That's what he said. And God wasn't trying to punish them. He wasn't holding back on them like we talked last week. God was saying, I'm teaching you how to trust me. I'm trying to teach you that I can resource any dream that you have. I can resource anything that I lead you to do. And that's what God was trying to teach them. He was trying to teach them how to trust him on the journey. And so they became very fearful. It's like, you know what? I don't know if God's going to provide for tomorrow or not. Now let's stop there. Time out. That's probably a question everybody in this room has asked at one point or another. I'm not sure God's going to resource me tomorrow or not. Now here's what they did. They were gathering manna, and I like to look at it like Cinnamon Crunch bagels, because I think it was sort of like that. And so they were gathering all the Cinnamon Crunch bagels that they could gather for today. And then they were like, you know what? I'm not sure God's going to come through for tomorrow, so I'm going to gather enough for tomorrow too. And they gathered enough for the next day. And what happened to the extra? It rotted. Now here's a couple things for all of us to think about in light of that story. You see, instead of releasing what they had, they were hoarding it. Now, there's nothing wrong with saving, accumulating, collecting. That's not the point. The point is this. God asked them, told them not to take any more than what they needed for just that day. And when they did take more than what they needed for that day, the surplus rotted. You see, God was trying to teach them, I can resource you each and every day. And they became so fearful that they tried to hoard food because they didn't think God would supply the next days. Now, guys, listen, folks, whether we're talking about food, money, it doesn't matter. Here's the point. You know, we're on this journey in life, okay? And there's so many, life is really volatile today, very unpredictable, more than ever. And it's like, okay, I'm on this journey. I've got forward focus. I'm moving forward. I know God has a plan. I know I've got to learn how to trust him to resource me if I haven't already learned that. And so instead of trying to take things into my own hands, God wants me to learn how to trust him. And that's where they were going with this. You see, God was able to bring them food in a desert. And if you read that in Exodus, God was also bringing them water in a desert. God actually brought water up from a rock. He brought manna from the sky. Now, I don't know what you think about the supernatural power of God, but I still believe in that. And in the Old Testament, we read where God resourced his people with things they had no ability to resource themselves with. You know what it's about, guys, folks? It's about simply trusting God to help you through the journey to get to your fulfilled promised land. And allowing God to resource whatever it is you're worried about today, whatever it is you think will not be supplied, God is saying, I can supply that resource. Whatever it is that you think is absolutely impossible, God says, no, I can do that. If you can trust me, then I can provide it. You see, God has this way of being able to renew and sustain this vision he gives us for life. And that's why Moses at the end still had vision and still had strength. It's because he learned how to trust God to continue to renew and sustain, renew and sustain, renew and sustain. Now, guys, I don't want to ever get up here and try to share something with you that I haven't lived or that I don't believe. And all you can do is take my word for this. It's not some preacher thing, okay? But I can tell you that there have been numerous times in my life that God has renewed and sustained, renewed and sustained. And I grab those things because they give you hope and peace on the journey. What's the next thing that usually happens to us on journeys? Well, I think it's setbacks and challenges. Let's turn all the way back now to Exodus chapter 13. Remember, we looked at the end of the story first this morning. Now let's go back to Exodus chapter 13 just for a minute. When Pharaoh let the people go, remember Moses goes and says, you know, Pharaoh, you got to let this vast army of people go. God said you had to, and we're going to go off to the promised land. We're leaving Egypt. We're going across the desert, and we're going to reach this place that God has designed just for us. Okay, that's the 1-minute version if you haven't read that. So when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country. Now get this, folks. This is a key thing right here, okay? God didn't lead them. He didn't lead them through the Philistine country. Now get this. Though that was shorter, for God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. Now get this. If you circle that, underline it, let it burn in your brain, that was the shorter way. Every time I read that, it always reminds me, God, I always want the fastest, easiest, quickest way to get there. Are you like that? I want the fastest, quickest, easiest way to get somewhere. And God's like, well, that's good, but that's usually not how I operate. And God's like, I'm taking them a different way. I know there's a shorter way. In fact, it was an 11-day journey, and it took them 40 years. It's like they were driving a smart car or something, okay? It's like, 40 years, an 11-day journey, 40 years. And the point is this. When you or I are on this journey and it seems like, man, why can't I get out of here? Why is this going so slow? Why isn't it going the way I thought it would? God's like, well, you know what? I've got a deeper, bigger plan than that of just getting you there. And if you read Exodus through Deuteronomy, you see how God worked over and over and over and over in these people's lives to bring miraculous things to their journey. You see, God's primary concern, I believe, is not where we are going, but it's who we are becoming. You see, during our journey, guys, we will decide to let setbacks and challenges take us backward or let them mold us to move us forward. Now, you look at your own life this morning and kind of draw an imaginary circle around that. And whatever's going on in that circle, I guarantee you there's some kind of challenge there. It's financial, it's educational, it's relational, it's something. And with whatever your challenge is this morning, we have the opportunity every day to either let those things pull us back or move us forward. And you see, it wasn't really about water. It wasn't about manna. It was about this. It was about learning how to move forward in a journey that will always bring challenges and setbacks. Always. And whether you're 18 or 80, you're still going to have setbacks and challenges. And it's learning how to move through those things and trusting God to resource the things that we can't do for ourselves. You know, it's really learning how to maneuver through those things. And some of them are really, some of them are designed by God to teach us how to grow. Think about this for a moment. Guys, Joe, if you will, put this slide up. I want people to see this. You know, do we let our circumstances crowd God out, or do we let our circumstances invite him in? I think that's something to seriously think about every day of our lives. And it's like, are the things in my circle, the challenges in my life, are those things crowding God out? And God gets crowded out like, okay, you know what? I got this. I don't need to pray. I can handle this. God doesn't care. All the things that we sometimes say or think or feel. And so it's like, are those things crowding God out? Or am I looking at these challenges and setbacks and circumstances in my life as an opportunity to invite God in? One of the biggest reasons why none of us or any of us invite God in sometimes is because we're afraid to. We're afraid to. And so Moses was using every one of these situations to invite God in instead of taking things into his own hands. How many of you this morning are worriers? You worry about everything. I mean, you are always anxious about something. Your life is driven by some level of fear about something, and all of us do that to some level. But I want you to think about this for a moment. If you're somewhat driven by fear, anxiety, worry, and all those things, you know, are you inviting God into that? Or are you trying to take that on yourself and fix it all and repair it? Here's 3 things I want you to think about with me today, okay? One of them is this. As you have forward focus, and I want us to leave here this morning capturing that forward focus, looking at our circumstances as a positive thing, not a negative thing. Everything is designed to draw us closer to God and to teach us something and to enhance our lives. And I want you to ask yourself, if you're a worrier, if you're full of anxiety and fear all the time, I want you to ask yourself, are you doing the best you can with what you have? One of the best ways you can help yourself is this. Just ask yourself, am I doing the very best I can with what I have to work with? Have I turned every rock over in my life? Have I left anything undone? Because when you walk through those questions and you answer them properly, honestly, and you come to the conclusion that, you know what, I've done everything I can. And not just to say, you know what, I've done my best. I don't mean that. I mean literally, honestly, in the heart, you've said, I've done everything I can with this. And it's like, okay, I'm cool. I'm comfortable. I've done all I can do. I've turned over every rock. I've left nothing undone. And you get this sense of peace when you do that. It's like, I've done all I can do with this. And I think that's what Moses did every time he came across one of these challenges. I'm doing the best I can with this. I'm not a very good cook, right? I can't bake, saute, any of that stuff, okay? I eat for nourishment, not for experience. And so, but I do know this, in baking a cake, I can do this. I can get all the ingredients together. I can mix them up. I can put them in the oven, but I can't bake the cake, okay? You know, those challenges and setbacks are a little bit like that sometimes. There are certain things we can do and some things we can't. And I want to encourage you this morning. If you've done everything that you can do in the situation that you're in and you can't do anything else, I want to encourage you to have peace with that and just simply move forward. You've done all you can do. Now leave it in the hands of someone else who can resource it for you. A second thing is this, is to help others maximize their potential. This is one of my passions, is helping people maximize their potential. Whether it's in the church or whether it's in the corporate world, you know, this has always been a vision that I've had, is to help people maximize their abilities, maximize who God's called them to be. And that's what God was doing with Moses. He's the focal point. He's the point man. And so God was trying to maximize Moses' abilities, maximize his leadership skills, whatever it might be. And he was trying to just bring all to Moses that he could possibly bring so that Moses could fulfill his greatest potential. A third thing is this, is to know what you're wired for. Folks, I can tell you, I still get numerous conversations with people in their 40s and 50s. Now, that doesn't include anybody in here today. Everybody's under that age, right? 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 But still talk to people in their 40s and 50s who don't know what they're supposed to do with their life. One of the reasons is they've never really discovered what they're wired for. I want you to think this morning about what you're most passionate about. What is it that really lights your fire, drives your motivation? That's most likely the thing that God's called you to do, most likely. Now, the question is this morning, are you doing it or not? John Maxwell has a leadership principle. He says this, find what you're passionate about and then find somebody who will pay you to do it, okay? So whatever your passions are this morning, maybe you can find someone to pay you to do that. But this is how we maximize what God's called us to do. And in these setbacks and challenges, guys, listen, when we know what we're wired for, I mean, we move through these things so much easier. When we help others maximize their potential, that comes back to us. When you invest in someone else, it will come back to you every time in some way or another. And then simply do the best you can with, that's all God expects you to do, is the best you can. And then trust him for the rest. That's all he expects from you. Second semester, real quick, is a dogged persistence. Deuteronomy 34:4, the land God promised, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. That's what he said to Moses. Now, can you imagine, listen, folks, can you imagine leading a group of people into a place called Promised Land with all these setbacks, all these challenges, all this griping and stuff going on, and God telling Moses, you know, Moses, you're not going to make it. I want you to lead all these people into the Promised Land, but guess what? You're never going to see it. Can you imagine that? Here's what I'm saying. Can you imagine remaining focused? Imagine remaining on track, motivated, encouraged to lead others to a place that you're never going to see. Can you imagine that? That's tough. But that's something we learn from the life of Moses that's like, man, I want to get a piece of that. I want to grab a piece of that. You see, it's not about what's in it for me. And I'm saying this generally to all of us this morning. It's not about what's in it for me. It's about what's in it for us. Remember last week when we talked about planting prayers? The prayers that you're planting right now, you may never see the answer to them, but guess what? Somebody will. Somebody will see the answer to your prayers because you're planting prayers for the future. Now, you might have the answer you may see the answer to your prayers, but you might not. And that's what he was telling him. You're going to the promised land. You're going to lead them in that direction, but you are not going to make it, Moses. And Moses said, okay, fine, but I'm still going to do this. I'm still going to stay with it. I'm still going to move in that direction. I'm going to stay motivated, encouraged, and I'm going to help them get there, even if I don't see it myself. Wow. That's a strange phenomenon. I want to leave you with this thought today. What do I do when I want to give up? I can't answer that for anybody in this room today but myself, not even my wife. What do I do when I want to give up? Here's something I want you to consider, okay? I'm suggesting this morning. Go deeper. Because I think that's what Moses did. If you read Exodus through Deuteronomy, especially for a guy who was not going to make it, he went deeper. You know what happens when you go deeper? You lock yourself into it. It's like, you know what? I'm here for the long haul. I'm not leaving. I'm not quitting. I'm not going to get run off, whatever it might be. Every time you feel like giving up, you remember Pastor Ron told you, 40 years ago, Pastor Ron said this. I happen to remember it. When I feel like giving up, go deeper. Get involved. Quick story, real quick, and then we're going to pray. Somebody taught me this, the first church I pastored when I was 30 years old. Can you imagine a 29-year-old kid pastoring a church? Can you imagine that? I was 29, 30 years old, I was pastoring this church, and it was out in Illinois somewhere. I know where it was. And I remember looking around the town there. This was a town of 2,000 people, had 9 churches. Can you imagine 9 churches and 2,000 people? It's like there's nobody left, okay? They're all going to church. and I remember talking to a guy much smarter than me. I was just a kid at that time. And I said, there's 9 churches in a town of 2,000 people. Where are my visitors? Where am I? And he's like, I tell you what, you go out there, he said, and you'll find them. And I remember thinking, here I am in this church of 2,000 people in this little town in Illinois. All I can see every time I get outside of the house is cornfields. And I'm like, God, what are you going to do here? And this guy taught me a lesson when I was 29 years old. He said, just go after the people. And I did. It was a hard lesson. And I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to talk to everybody. I'm going to talk to the fence posts. I'm going to get an ear of corn and talk to it if I have to. And it's like, and here's what happened. God brought people. You see, here's what I'm telling all of us this morning. I'm still telling myself this. When you feel like giving up, just go deeper and watch what happens. Watch something supernatural happens when you go deeper. Don't give up. Do not give up. Don't quit. Don't bail, okay? Do all you can do. Keep moving forward. Focus forward. Go forward. You're going to have setbacks and challenges. Move through them. Help God teach you through those things. Learn from them so that you can do it better next time. And keep going forward. Jesus, thank you so much. You certainly did.